The food is from there, and the salad with the bread. I'm not gonna. What's the name of it, Kathy? Panzanella. Panzanella. So that was something that we got at a farm-to-table place that was actually really well known in the area, and it was peasant food. So it was something that they had stale bread and they'd have vegetables, and so they would just kind of throw this salad together, and so it was kind of poor people's food. They considered it, but really delicious and probably something that you would pay a lot of money for now. and and the Greek pizza is something that kind of evolved, I think, from either I have a Moosewood cookbook and I have a Beyond the Moon cookbook. And when we had homeschool days and we were homeschooling and we would get together for meals and potlucks, that was one of the things that kind of came out of that. And before we were homeschooling, Kathy and I and a few other women all got to know each other because we were all having babies at the same time. And once we had our children, and I had older children, we had baby lunch for a year. It lasted exactly a year, just about. And the reason was, once the kids started moving around, we were just like, nope, not doing. Nobody wanted to host baby lunch anymore. But one of the things that we got through baby lunch was the beet salad that you'll see sometimes at our potlucks in town. So that isn't here today, but that was one of them. And on the dessert table, Kathy reminded me that the wacky cake actually was because of the egg shortage, so maybe we start to make wacky cake again. So years ago with the war. So I put wacky cake into cupcakes, and that's kind of has a double meaning because both of my grandmothers did German chocolate cupcakes. One was full German, and the other one was Scotland. And so the German cupcakes kind of represent my mom and my grandmother's. And then we have scones that are supposed to be Scottish. I only had gluten-free flour, so I made them with the gluten-free flour, and they're a little flat. But when I would go to my grandmother's house, and she would be making these scones, and I would take a biscuit, and I would go, well, she made sure it's not a biscuit, it's a scone. But I said, Lisa, these don't taste like anything. And she would say, well, you have to wait till we dress them up. And so with the whipped cream and the raspberry coulis and other things, that it made them delicious. And so that's there for my grandmother Lisa. And the Buckeyes, which don't look as beautiful as hers, because they lived in Ohio, and Ohio is the Buckeye state. And so she would make Buckeyes quite often. And my mother's mother was this little petite woman. When we would go to a restaurant, she never ordered an entree. She ordered 2 desserts. And that was my grandmother. She was like, lived to be 86 and just loved dessert. So, yeah, so that's kind of carried through our family, I think. So, yeah, and so I think so I would love if people would come up and talk about food and what the food means to them and things like that. Feel so inclined. That would be great. Well,
and they are the official cookie of the city of Nanaimo, British Columbia. My mother had a dear friend who moved there when her husband retired in the early 60s. And she lived there until she died in 2006. Now these cookies are very rich and very sweet, and you certainly wouldn't call them health food. But you know, she lived to be 105.
Black bean soup. And when David and I first met, neither of us cooked. We lived in New York City in this small apartment, and we'd like to have people over. But the only thing we could figure out how to make was this black bean soup, so it became kind of a staple. And when we moved to Boise, Idaho, we didn't know anyone there, and we came up with the idea to do soup night. So what that involved was we would make 3 big batches of soup, including the black bean soup, and we invited 30 people, I think, the first time. We didn't know any of them. We just went around the neighborhood with little slips of paper. And on the invitation, I said, you only should bring a bowl. Don't bring, nothing else. It's just, we're serving this. And if you don't feel like staying, you can just come and do takeout. So the first one, we had about 10 people show up. We did it the next month. We had 3 months that we committed to. And I would say probably like 25 people came. And it was amazing to me because there were 2 women who were really hitting it off. And I found out that they had lived like 4 houses away from each other for 20-something years and had never met. So it was really heartwarming, and the soup night still goes on in that neighborhood. Other people took it over after the 3rd one, and yeah, it was a really nice little community. So whenever I make the soup, I think of them. And then I also brought, David isn't here because he's visiting his mom in Seattle, and she's just getting moved into memory care. So in honor of her, I made this, it's like Sarah's Christmas coffee cake that she would bring every Christmas. And yeah, I didn't make it as good as she does.
Marinated fish. I'm kind of a Heinz 57 when it comes to my ancestry, first generation American, and my father's father was Greek. I never met him, he died long before I was born. And his wife, my grandmother, was Russian, and she learned a few Greek dishes to cook for him. And so when my parents got married, she gave my mother a few recipes, except her recipes were, typical of a lot of people, where you put some of this and you add some of this and you add until it's a taste, right? And so my mother did her best to sort of massage it into a recipe. It still has a little add this to taste kind of thing. But this dish is one of the very few things that my mother made that my grandmother her mother-in-law had given to her. I contemplated doing things from the other side of my family. My other grandmother wasn't much of a cook, and my grandfather, so she was also Russian or maybe Ukrainian, we're not sure. And my other grandfather was from Austria, and he was a meat and potatoes kind of guy. And I don't eat a lot of meat, so the Wiener Schnitzel was right out, and some of the other things that he really liked. So I thought I would stick with the other side of the family, the one grandparent I never met.
And Felix and Robbie. The popovers and maple butter are awesome. But I also want to talk about Grandma Joe's hamburger hash. So that's the dish that Kathy made. And Grandma Joe used to make this when you were a kid, right, Kathy? Yep. And I think my mom hated to cook, but she made something like that also. And it's kind of become comfort food for Kathy and I. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think is it a Pennsylvania Dutch tradition? It's lost in the mists of ancient time. So, anyway, hamburger hash.
I looked it up, and carrot cake started in Europe and somehow got over here. But my family didn't eat carrot cake at all. So, like most groups in Tinmouth, I'm bending the rules. So I used to work in the intensive care unit at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, and food was really important there. And a nurse that I worked with, Shirley Clark, she was off duty, and I saw her come in the back of the unit, and she put a pan in the back refrigerator of the unit. And she was gone maybe 5 or 6 minutes. And somebody came down to me and said, "Chris, we found this carrot cake in the back refrigerator. Can we have it?" And I said, "No. If somebody put it there, it's not ours." And so maybe 5 minutes later, somebody came around with a cut piece for me of carrot cake. the best that they had ever tasted. So I took a bite of it, and I agreed with them. And so then we went along taking care of critically ill patients, and then I heard this scream come from the back of the unit, right by that refrigerator, and it was mild-mannered Shirley Clark discovering that the carrot cake she was taking to a potluck was more than half gone. So, being the responsible nurse in charge that I was that night, I hid in until it calmed down back there. I really wanted that recipe, but if you think I asked her the next day, I don't think it was a year, but I waited many months before I asked her for help with a carrot cake recipe. This is the one she gave me, the page in my cookbook. You can hardly read it. I have made probably, I don't know, 50 or 60 wedding cakes out of it. My brother's was for 400, so I think it was like, I don't know, 12 or 15 batches of it to make that much cake. And it's simple. So people will often ask me, what makes this so good? And they want to know what extra I put in it. And what I do is I don't put anything extra. It's just carrot.
Hey. Some of the details of this story. But my grandma developed dementia when I was very young. Do you remember how old? I don't either. But she lived with dementia for 15 years. So she was present at holidays, but only really when the music was being sung or played, she'd show back up. But my cousin Molly took over making Grandma's famous potato bake, which I only knew was famous because Molly made it every single Christmas.
Holiday.
Easter also, yeah, maybe Thanksgiving also. And I think this is where my love of cornflake topping on anything came from. But during the pandemic, we lost Molly. And we'd had this idea before she passed and never got around to it, to photocopy Grandma's handwriting and turn it into tea towels for everyone at Christmas of this recipe. So the first Christmas that rolled around that we could be together after Molly's passing, we brought this along and made a special batch, and Molly's husband came, and we're all talking about it and opening these, and he goes, "Birdsalls, y'all are delusional. It's not that good." Why it's famously bad.
Here for food. It just reminded me, talking about parents and grandparents things, my mother used to make raised glazed donuts. Man, were they good. Oh yeah. Well, Howard Buff and I happened to be the only ones there that day. And she was making them and they set them out there. Well, we each had 13 pieces. And she says, you know, somebody else might want some of those.
Cook. I don't have the whole put a pinch of that in and know my way around the kitchen, but I really like to bake, and so I'm all about recipes. And so my dad and one of my best friends went to Scotland a few years ago because we have some Scottish heritage, and it was awesome for me and my dad. And their breakfasts are just just they're huge and and so we would always try to go out and have this big breakfast. And Yorkshire pudding is in that realm of things with a lot of other things. And so when I came back, I wanted to try to find something that I could kind of that was very technical in terms of just follow the directions and things like that. And so the popover is very similar to that. And it's the best thing for in the wintertime. I get up very early for work, so a lot of times I'm up before my wife and the boys. So I'd it takes a while to make, but I'd sneak downstairs, on when it's snowing out, and I would get it all ready so that they could basically when they're coming down, I got the popovers out. So those are some of my favorite moments in the winter.
The best friends. in the week that I was there. And so it's really fun. And I was fascinated. So they lived in the country in West Germany, and we lived with Tante Dina while we were there, and that was my grandmother's sister. And I was fascinated with women that had long hair. Because my mother and all her friends had short hair. And so I would get up really early with Tante Dina and watch her do her hair up. Like comb it all out. She had steel gray hair going out, put it in her braids, she would wear it for the day. And I just thought it was the best. And they were really proud. They had just gotten indoor plumbing, and they were really, really proud of that. I remember we would go fishing with corn kernels when we go fishing in the river. And so yeah, it was really, really fun. Happy memories. And my great grandmother, her name was Oma, which is grandmother in German, and she lived to be 104, and she was joking because she was still with it then. And she said, "Look, I don't want to live to be 105 because I'm not going back to school," she said.
From a recipe from my mother, who grew up in New Orleans. It's where I was born. So my mother was not a cook, and she taught me how to cook by opening cans and opening frozen packaging, you know? So I was the one that sort of tried to do things using fresh food, which was, I remember the first Thanksgiving when I actually got real sweet potatoes instead of from the can. Anyway, my mother, as I said, she wasn't a cook, but it was after everyone had left home and she had a granddaughter that she suddenly started making brownies. And she made brownies from this cookbook called the River Road Cookbook, which is a Louisiana Junior League cookbook. And so it was the only recipe in there that I think it might have been the only one she used, because that was the page that was all dirty and had chocolate on it. So I was just talking with my siblings on Friday night. We had a Zoom call, and I asked them, I said, so, you know, I was trying to think of something to bring, and all of a sudden they said, Mom's brownies. So they're over there, Mom's brownies.
They're great.
I adjusted it a little bit because they're gluten-free.
And the only thing related to food was this one lady got up to talk, and her family had a little 2x6, and someone told them that if you put a hot dog in there, it would cook up and taste good. And little did they know that they dumped in a couple packages of it, and of course it plugged up all the holes, and it never boiled again because of all the wretched stuff in the hot dog. So, eating this food, you guys are fantastic. What great recipes and cooks. This is a meal to remember.